From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome back, friends. Pull your chair a little closer to the fire. October has arrived, and with it, the shadows grow bold. This month on From the Void, I'm doing something special. Each week, I'll bring you a different alleged case of possession. No two the same. Some tangled in faith, some in fear, some in the deep mysteries of the human mind. And at the end of each one, it won't be me who decides if it was real. It'll be you. Tonight, we begin with one of the strangest and most well-documented American cases of the last half-century. A story of a family in Gary, Indiana, who claimed their home was overrun by something evil. A darkness that left behind police reports, social worker testimony, and even hospital records. This is the case of Latoya Ammons and her children, the House of 200 Demons. So settle in, let the firelight flicker, and let's step into the darkness together. Gary, Indiana, once a booming steel town and the birthplace of Michael Jackson, and now a shell of its former self. Poverty, crime, whole blocks of homes left abandoned, windows boarded up, lawns choked with weeds. It was here, in November 2011, that Latoya Ammons, her 3 children, and her mother Rosa Campbell moved into a small rental house on Carolina Street. On the outside, it looked like nothing special, just another weathered house in a weathered town. But within weeks, the family began to claim it was something else entirely. According to Rosa Campbell, the very first sign came in the middle of winter. The screened-in porch filled with swarms of black flies. They appeared in thick clusters around the windows, buzzing so loudly it drowned out the hum of the space heater. No matter how many times they swatted, sprayed, or cleaned, the flies came back. Again and again. It didn't make any sense. This was January. Gary winters are brutal, and flies don't swarm in sub-zero cold. According to Rosa Campbell, the longer they lived in the Carolina Street house, the stranger things became. She told a DCS caseworker that one night, while sitting in the living room, she watched a shadowy figure move slowly across the wall. Its outline stretched unnaturally as it walked, as though it wasn't bound by the room itself. Rosa also claimed she saw footprints appear across the floor with no one there to make them. She described them as greasy, almost slimy, as if someone had walked barefoot through oil and tracked it across the house. Latoya Ammons reported being woken in the night by violent shaking of her bed. She told a priest later that it felt like the mattress was bucking beneath her, as though trying to throw her off. On several occasions, both women say they heard unexplained knocks echo through the walls, sometimes 3 sharp bangs in a row, other times scratching that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. And Rosa swore she once saw a shadowy figure pacing the porch, its form visible even through the curtains. She pulled them back, and there was nothing. The house, they believed, was no longer just unsettling. It was inhabited, and it was growing bolder. But the worst of it was yet to come, because soon, the strange phenomena would shift its focus, away from Rosa and Latoya, and directly onto the children. If the strange activity had stayed with Rosa and Latoya, maybe the story would have ended there. But soon, The children themselves became the focus. And that's when things turned terrifying. LaToya claimed that her 12-year-old daughter began speaking in a deep, unnatural growl. At times, she described visions of death, even explaining in detail what it felt like to be strangled or killed. Her 9-year-old son allegedly displayed violent outbursts. His eyes rolled back in his head. He growled at family members, and one night, according to LaToya, he levitated off the bed. Family friends present that evening swore they witnessed it, saying it took multiple adults to pull him back down. By the spring of 2012, the disturbances in the Carolina Street house had escalated beyond what Rosa and LaToya thought that they could manage. LaToya sought help where most people would start: doctors. She took her children to a family physician, telling him that they were tormented by spirits. According to the physician's notes, the kids were acting strangely during the appointment, cursing at medical staff in guttural voices, their eyes rolling back. The doctor was so disturbed, he recommended the family see a psychiatrist immediately. But that wasn't the only call made that day. The doctor also contacted the Department of Child Services. He feared the children's behavior might point to abuse, neglect, or a mental health crisis. That was the moment outsiders officially stepped in. Soon after, a DCS case manager was assigned. When she visited the house, she noted Rosa's claims of shadows, oily footprints, and voices, entering the claims into official record. But more importantly, she observed the children directly. She documented their behavior in her official reports, noting episodes of sudden rage, violence, and what she called bizarre affect. At that point, the story stopped being just a family's anecdotes. It became part of the state's records. Later, when the children were removed from the home temporarily for observation, it led directly to that infamous hospital evaluation, a setting where, for the first time, multiple non-family adults would claim they saw something that defied explanation. By mid-April 2012, after the physician's visit raised alarms, the family's case was in the hands of Indiana Department of Child Services. The children were brought to Methodist Hospital in Gary for evaluation. Inside a small exam room, DCS family case manager Valerie Washington, registered nurse Willie Lee Walker, and grandmother Rose Campbell sat with the 9-year-old boy. Washington would later write that the boy flashed a, quote, weird grin. Then events escalated. According to her official report, as summarized in multiple outlets, he glided backward on the floor, wall, and ceiling before flipping and landing on his feet. Nurse Willie Lee Walker told reporters he saw the same thing. He walked up the wall, flipped over her, and stood there. There's no way he could have done that. I was like, everybody gotta go. Walker and Washington say they ran from the room in fear. For Walker, it was undeniable. But here's where the story gets tricky. Valerie Washington's written account suggests the boy may have been holding his grandmother's hand. Maybe one hand, maybe both, as he climbed. That single detail changes everything. If one hand was held, he might have used her as an anchor point, leveraging balance against the wall. Although using one arm as support would be incredibly difficult to maintain balance, even for a lighter child. If both were held, it becomes far less plausible. How does a 9-year-old flip over his grandmother with no free arm to brace? But we can't remove this as a possibility. And if he wasn't held at all, as Walker seemed to imply, then we're left with something far stranger. The truth is, the reports don't say. No one pressed the witnesses on the mechanics. Was Rosa bracing him? Was he pulling against her? Did his feet actually reach the ceiling, or just partway up the wall? Those questions remain unanswered. And that's what makes this moment so enduring. Was it a terrifying breach of physics, or a stunt made possible by details left unspoken? The next morning, Friday, April 20th, 2012, the hospital chaplain phoned Father Michael Maginot during his Bible study. People had run out of the room after they saw a boy walking backwards up a wall, and asked whether he could come. Maginot didn't leave then, but offered to investigate if the family contacted him. They called the next day. By the way, this comes from Maginot's own on-record interview. We'll come back to this later. In the days that followed, the hospital incident set everything in motion. The Department of Child Services concluded the children might be in danger, whether from abuse, neglect, or something harder to name. They were removed from LaToya Ammons' custody and placed temporarily into foster care. DCS also ordered psychological evaluations. Case manager Valerie Washington documented the episode in her April 23, 2012 intake report. She described the boy's bizarre behavior, his backwards climb, and the terrified flight of the adults in the room. Nurse Willie Lee Walker gave his own account, insisting to reporters that there was no natural explanation for what he had seen. But for Washington's notes, ambiguous as they are, left investigators grasping for answers. Was the boy braced by Rosa Campbell? Did his feet reach the ceiling? Or had the terror of the moment colored what people thought they saw? And going back to the psychological evaluations that DCS ordered, according to records reviewed by the Indianapolis Star, one psychologist wrote that Ammons was experiencing delusions of ghosts and that the children were performing for their mother. Another evaluation noted the children's behavior was consistent with delusions influenced by their mother. Doctors documented that the youngest son would sometimes describe what it felt like to be killed, using language far beyond his years. The daughter admitted she sometimes acted possessed when she was bored. The evaluations painted a conflicted picture. On paper, they suggested the children were feeding off their mother's fears, performing the part of the possessed. And yet, some behaviors, sudden rages, guttural voices, eyes rolling back, remained difficult to place neatly into that box. For skeptics, this was the strongest evidence that the case wasn't supernatural at all, but the result of psychological stress and suggestion. For believers, the evaluations only confirmed how cleverly the demonic could mimic mental illness. But the story didn't stop at hospitals and foster homes. Back on Carolina Street, the disturbances continued. Rosa and LaToya reported oily footprints on the blinds, strange noises, and a presence that wouldn't let go. When police officers were called to investigate, they didn't just dismiss the family's claims. They wrote up detailed reports that would later become public record. And some of what they described was every bit as unsettling as the family's own accounts. On May 10th, 2012, the Gary Police Department was called to the house on Carolina Street. Accompanying them were DCS case manager Valerie Washington, a DCS supervisor, and a local priest named Father Michael Maginot, who had just been contacted about the case. The officers entered with skepticism, but what they wrote down afterward tells a stranger story. Inside the home, police took photos. In several of them, they later noted strange silhouettes and blurry anomalies appeared in the images, shapes they could not explain. More unsettling, Washington and the officers reported finding a slimy, oily substance dripping down the blinds in one room. They cleaned it off, only to return later and find the blinds coated again. When they moved into the basement, the temperature dropped noticeably. On the concrete floor, they reported finding a strange powdery residue near the altar-like setup the family had created as a space for prayer. The Indianapolis Star describes it as an area where the Ammons family had set up an altar covered with a statue of St. Joseph, a cross, and candles. No clear source was identified for the powdery substance found near it. Another officer had reached for a recorder, only to have the device sputter and die. Batteries completely drained. This happened repeatedly. Fresh batteries drained within minutes. The device cut out when he tried to capture audio in the basement. According to Father Maginot, it was here that the sense of a malevolent presence was strongest. The air itself seemed heavier. To him, it was the center of the haunting. The officers didn't say demons in their reports, but they did write down what they saw: the altar, the residue, the equipment failures. And they admitted the place gave them an unease they couldn't shake. Another officer wrote that his in-car radio stopped transmitting properly for a time after leaving the house. One officer described feeling a sudden pressure on his chest, as if he were being pushed backward, while standing alone in the basement. Another later told colleagues he walked away with a deep sense of dread that lingered long after he left the property. When they filed their reports, the police didn't write demons, but they also didn't write hoax either. Instead, they listed oily blinds that reappeared, unexplained residue near the altar, camera anomalies, equipment failures, and the officer's own unease. For a department to put those details in writing under oath is unusual. It gave the Carolina Street case something rare in possession lore: the weight of law enforcement testimony. So let's circle back around to how Father Maginot first gets involved. As we covered earlier, he was first contacted by the hospital chaplain at Methodist Hospital. We also mentioned that Father Maginot didn't immediately rush over. He indicates he'd be happy to get involved once he's contacted directly by the family. And that's exactly what happens the following day. LaToya Ammons and Rosa Campbell give him a call asking for help. Maginot visited the Carolina Street house accompanied by a Gary police officer and a DCS representative. He walked through each room, listening as Rosa and LaToya described their experiences. In one bedroom, he reported seeing oily footprints spread across the blinds. He said he wiped them clean, only to find them reappear a short time later, a detail echoed in the police reports. Down in the basement, Maginot stopped at the makeshift altar. He later said the air felt oppressive, heavier than the rest of the house. He placed his crucifix on the table and began to pray. He claimed the crucifix trembled in his hands. Maginot began with prayers of deliverance, testing the waters. According to his testimony, LaToya convulsed violently during the prayers, her body tightening as though resisting each word. He concluded there was no ordinary explanation left, and so filed a request with the Bishop of the Diocese of Gary for permission to conduct a formal exorcism. That permission was granted. It was one of the few Catholic-sanctioned exorcisms in the U.S. in recent decades. So let's talk about the first exorcism. Before full rites, Maginot began with what are called prayers of deliverance. These are less formal than a sanctioned exorcism, but often used as preparation. According to his own account, during one of these early prayers, LaToya convulsed violently. Her body stiffened, her hands clenched, and she doubled over as though resisting. Maginot described the reaction as immediate and forceful. The first formal exorcism took place at his parish church in Merrillville. Maginot recited the rite of exorcism in Latin, invoking the authority of Christ over demonic spirits. Witnesses reported that as he prayed, LaToya again convulsed, her face contorted in pain. According to Maginot, her eyes rolled back and she growled in a low guttural voice, words that were unintelligible. It wasn't her voice, he told the Indianapolis Star. The second formal session, and by most accounts the most intense, again took place at St. Stephen Martyr. Maginot read the rite. LaToya writhed in the pew. He pressed a crucifix to her forehead. According to his testimony, she screamed, not in her own voice, but in something deeper, harsher. He commanded the spirit to leave. The growling voice cursed him. "You will lose," it reportedly said. The final exorcism was quieter. Maginot later said it felt different from the others, less chaotic, more subdued. He repeated the rite, commanding the spirits to leave. LaToya slumped, exhausted, but did not convulse as violently as before. When the session ended, Maginot said she looked relieved, as if a weight had lifted. From that day forward, the family reported that the disturbances had ceased. The house remained, but the evil seemed gone. Maginot performed 3 full exorcisms in total, 2 in English, 1 in Latin. He testified that after the final session, LaToya Ammons and her children returned to normal life. The children were reunited with their mother. The case was closed. But the Carolina Street house, by then abandoned, had gained a reputation all its own. After LaToya and her family moved out, the house on Carolina Street sat empty. The landlord, tired of the publicity, eventually sold it for just $35,000. The buyer? Paranormal celebrity Zach Bagans, host of the TV show Ghost Adventures. Bagans purchased the house in 2014 after reading about the case in the Indianapolis Star. He brought in his crew, filmed a documentary called Demon House, and claimed he experienced terrifying phenomena during the shoot. He said he suffered mysterious medical problems afterward, and that several crew members quit during filming due to fear. In 2018, Bagans announced that he had the house demolished, claiming it was too dangerous to remain standing. But Bagans is a polarizing figure. Critics argue his shows exaggerate or outright stage phenomena. Skeptics pointed out that demolishing the house also conveniently prevented future independent investigation. Some locals in Gary saw it as exploitation, turning a family's trauma into paranormal spectacle. For believers, his purchase confirmed the house's reputation as a site of evil. For skeptics, it muddied the waters, making it harder to separate fact from sensationalism. So where does that leave us? On one side, multiple outside witnesses, a DCS case manager, a hospital nurse, police officers, a Catholic priest who believed so strongly he performed not 1, but 3 sanctioned exorcisms. That's more corroboration than almost any other possession case in modern history. On the other side, psychologists who said LaToya was delusional, that her children were performing for her. Skeptics who point to natural explanations, oily residue, camera glitches, confirmation bias. But then there's the family itself. After the exorcisms, LaToya regained custody of her children. The courts decided that they were not in danger. The disturbances stopped. And here's the detail that lingers. The Ammons family never sought fame. They never wrote a book, never sold their story, never even gave another interview. Since 2014, they've lived in silence. And that's what makes this story so unnerving. If it was a hoax, why walk away without profiting? If it was delusion, why did trained professionals swear to things they couldn't explain? Maybe the boys' wall walk was a trick of balance. Maybe the oily blinds was residue. Maybe the photos were just bad flash. Or maybe something darker touched that little house on Carolina Street. Something strong enough to leave behind sworn testimonies, official reports, and a trail of unanswered questions. The Ammons family has chosen to leave it all behind. But the legend of the House of 200 Demons refuses to stay buried. One final piece I want to address. because this was a major question that I had myself. If the children were the ones exhibiting the signs of possession, then why was it that the approved exorcisms were only performed on the mother? And why, after completing the series of exorcisms on the mother, did the activity with the children seem to stop? Because again, it was the children who first showed signs: the violent fits, the guttural voices, the impossible wall walk. Yet, when Father Maginot performed his rites, he performed them only on Latoya Ammons. The church said the evil clung to her, that she was the doorway, and through her, the darkness spread to the house and the children. Skeptics argue differently, that once the children were removed from their mother's influence, the behavior stopped. And when they returned after her exorcisms, with the story broken and the attention gone, the symptoms never came back. Either way, the result was the same. The children went back to normal, and the family disappeared into silence, never seeking fame or fortune from their ordeal. So that's the story of the Ammons family, the House of 200 Demons, a case with police reports, hospital records, priests, and psychologists all tangled together, and a family that simply wanted to move on. Maybe it was hysteria, maybe it was performance, or maybe, just maybe, something unholy did claw its way into that little house on Carolina Street. And the scariest part? We'll never know for sure. But here in October, the season when the veil feels thin, we'll keep going. Because the Ammons family wasn't the only modern case to raise questions the church and the skeptics still can't fully answer. Until next time, stoke the fire, keep the lights low, and join me again as we step further into the void.